To that conversation we're planning to have regarding private schools, and some independent schools have already opened. Let's speak to Mandla Mthembu from NAISA, the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Mthembu. Thank you so very much for being with us on SABC News this afternoon, sir.
Yes, good afternoon to you and your listeners.
How did the opening of schools go this week for independent schools? There's obviously been a lot of concern about COVID-19 and adherence and so forth. Take us through what you know about the reopening of schools this week of independent schools.
Yeah, the opening of independent schools this week went quite well. I would go as far as saying plus minus 10 to 15% of our schools opened this week on the 13th, and everything went smoothly because many of them have already been able to put in place all the measures needed to meet the compliance with the regulations. From last year, many of our schools have been working at upping their game towards making sure that our children are safe at school, and even parents who come to school are safe. So everything went very well this week.
Yeah, I wonder what your thoughts are on the fact that, I just spoke to NAISA, and they are saying that they support proposals for government schools, public schools, to delay their reopening. And I wonder what, if you would reflect on that, what that would mean. I mean, from where I'm sitting, and I did share the view with NAISA, is the concern about the gap in education. And it's not right for, public schools to say, oh, well, we don't care, we're only worried about our kids here in public schools. What are your thoughts, your initial thoughts about the fact that there might be a postponement or delay in terms of government schools reopening?
Well, our thoughts have always been about making sure that all our children in this country, regardless where they go to school, whether public or independent, they get an education, quality education. And we do understand NAISA's position, and the view that they share is based on the understanding that if we flood our roads with parents and children going back to school at once during the peak of COVID-19, that is not going to assist us as a country to flatten the curve. There's a need for us to take certain measures to make sure that we reduce the volume of people on the streets, on the road. And the very fact that from November last year, we've come to realize that this new wave of COVID-19 is also affecting our children. I'm sure you do remember that in November, December, we had reports of the rage parties that happened where many kids were infected with COVID-19. And so that alone tells us that now the virus is also going down there to our children. And we'd like to support that call that says there's a need for us to delay the opening of schools, public schools in particular, because of the volume. If you look at the cohort of our schooling system in this country, you'll come to know that independent schools in particular, we only cater for plus minus 5% of the schooling population, which means 95% of the schooling population is with the public sector, the public schooling system. So when they make that call, one understands where they're coming from. And we do appreciate that call because it's going to assist all of us to make sure that we are able to arrest the curve.
Okay. And then would you then acknowledge, given all of this, would you then be in a position to acknowledge the sort of imbalances between public and private schools in dealing and perhaps coping with COVID-19? You might look at the fact that, perhaps learners in private schools easily, access things like internet. That's not necessarily the case for children in public schools. The things like data, Wi-Fi, all of that tend to be, quite easy things to get. I spoke to learners last year from public schools who were mentioning the fact that, look, we're even struggling to get data, for us to even do these online classes. I mean, would you then be in a position to acknowledge that there is this wide gap, and perhaps, the delay would also then increase those gaps?
Indeed, I would acknowledge that without any hesitation. We live in the most unequal country in the world, where the gap between the poor and those who have the means is so wide. And even last year, this issue and question kept coming up, that there are inequalities in our society. And this period where we are facing COVID, that has been emphasized by the fact that many children who go to public schools cannot access online learning, whereas a number of children within the independent school sector are able to do so. But I need to also probably correct this picture. There's a picture that the public has. The public tends to think that independent schools, all of them are rich schools, well-to-do, have got everything they need. No, it is not the case. I'll go as far as plus minus 70 to 80% of our independent schools are in the low to medium fee cohort.
Yeah.
In the sense that the fees they charge are not very high. And a number of these schools are actually subsidized by the state for them to be able to continue to do the work that they need to do. So it is not necessarily correct that all children who go to independent schools have access to online learning, have access to Wi-Fi. It's not necessarily the case. There are many independent schools who cannot offer online learning because they just don't have the money and the means, because they survive through subsidies and through other means to make funds and to run the school. So these are realities that we need to face. But coming back to your point of inequalities and public schools, we as NAISA have been constantly saying that there's a need for government, number one, to look at how we improve the teaching and learning in public schools to a level where all parents can feel comfortable with their children going there, in that it must not depend on whether you have money or not or no money for you to be able to offer your child quality education. Indeed, there's a lot of quality education happening in public schools. We should not deny that. But we need to acknowledge that also there are resources which need to be put there to up the game to a level where our schools in the public space can actually be at a level where they are seen to be schools which are viable and desirable for many middle class and upper class people to take their kids to.
Yeah. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you, Mr. Mthembu. Thank you for giving us your time. So interesting indeed.
Thank you very much.